Pensacola, Florida, is a city that takes its history seriously. In August 1559, a Spanish expedition led by Tristan de Luna made landfall here, establishing the first European settlement in what would eventually be the United States, 6 years earlier than St. Augustine. But a hurricane struck a month later, wrecking the ships that were still carrying most of the colony's supplies, and Luna was forced to abandon the site. That hasn't stopped Pensacola from declaring itself America's first settlement.
They start at 1565 and we start at 1559, and they always point to us, well, you were a failure. And that's also true. So it's interesting, the public has gotten involved with t-shirts, and I think one of the local breweries hired a plane to pull a banner over St. Augustine, and I think that's great. But we have a nice friendly rivalry, and both have a decent claim to being America's first settlement.
But that's not Pensacola's only stake on history. The deep water bay was resettled by the Spanish 3 more times, in 1698, 1723, and finally 1756. It changed hands several times between the Spanish, French, and British. One of those instances happened in 1781 during the American Revolution, when Spanish General Bernardo de Galvez led a siege of British Pensacola that ended explosively on the town's northern hill, seizing Britain's foothold on the Gulf Coast and helping the cause of American independence. 4 decades later, Spain's empire in the Americas had become untenable. Economically weakened by multiple wars and revolutions, they could no longer secure the Florida border against American incursions.
I think everyone saw the writing on the wall. Spain was no longer able to really manage and control Florida. There was no money, and the Americans were certainly looking forward. They were looking for expansion.
1821 signified really the collapse of the Spanish Empire. Mexico became independent that year. Brazil came independent, and several other what we now call South American countries that were formerly Spanish colonies became independent in 1821.
After the ratification of the Adams-Onis Treaty, President James Monroe sent General Andrew Jackson, who was familiar with Pensacola after 2 clashes there, to oversee the transfer and serve as Florida's first territorial governor. Very near this spot, Museum Plaza, was where the official exchange of flags ceremony took place on July 17, 1821. It was a day of great pomp and pageantry. It was the birthday of Florida's first 2 counties, Escambia and St. John's. It was the day when Floridians became Americans. You may have already noticed something about the framing of these stories. A lot of the historical actors are completely unmentioned. 2 European settlements arguing about who was first ignores the indigenous people who had already lived here for thousands of years. Men of rank and power like Tristan de Luna, Bernardo de Galvez, and Andrew Jackson have usually been front and center, literally raised up on pedestals. In recent decades, however, historians have made efforts to rethink the perspective of these narratives.
In the past, and this is not a criticism, it's just the way it was, you had men who were writing the history. And typically it was the history of a big man or a big event. And it did not really include the common man and woman or children or any events that might really make up your communal history as a group of people. And we wanted to shift away from that.
50 years ago, the primary way of looking backwards in historical times was to focus on the great men. And they were great leaders. They represented and did incredibly large things. But that was where it focused. And had we been 50 years ago, it would have focused on Andrew Jackson.
Certainly, Andrew Jackson played a large role bringing Florida under the fold of the United States. But the really big story is not Andrew Jackson. The big story is all of the people that were here and what they added to the dialogue and to the story of how we became Americans.
Dr. Judy Bentz and Margot Stringfield were named co-chairs of the 200th Anniversary Commission by Pensacola Mayor Grover Robinson. And they understood that representation on the committee would set the tone and the direction of the bicentennial.
When Margot and I and Rob Overton, the director of the UWF Historic Trust, sat down and said, all right, if we are going to have inclusion as one of our primary themes, this committee needs to be made up of the diversity representatives from the diverse groups that we have.
And so to that end, we involved people from the Hispanic community, from the African American community, from the indigenous community.
And of course, people popped up. African American City Councilwoman Taniane Broughton was a natural.
We're really telling history from the bottom up. It's just not focused on military leaders like Andrew Jackson or governments. We're really addressing what were the people of the city doing? What did the people look like? How inclusive was Pensacola? And we know that Pensacola was a very, very diverse city.
We also had John Appleyard on the committee just before he passed. One thing that John Appleyard shared with all of us, which was a new perspective to me, is that the people here in Pensacola in 1821, number one, had to learn pretty much of a new language, and they had no idea what democracy was all about, what voting was all about. Remember, they were under a king.
But on that day, people that were standing there in the plaza watching this was the day, this was the change, the sea change for them. They went from being Spanish to being Americans. Now, they retained their Spanish and French heritage. Everyone retained their cultural traditions. You did not see that just stop and drop away. But this was the day that people became Americans. And it would have been something of great import to them.
The commission had support from the city of Pensacola, Escambia County, and the state of Florida. They agreed it would be a grand commemoration of the 1821 transfer, centering and celebrating the diverse people of Pensacola, both past and present. But then,
China has identified the cause of the
mysterious new virus.
Coronavirus
Has now reached the United States. Thousands of people are self-quarantining.
Lockdowns and isolation.
The great shutdown of 2020 is underway.
It's an evolving situation.
An international public health emergency.
This is a global
the most serious health crisis in a century.
We planned out, had the beginnings of a plan to have a big celebration and have things along the way during the 2020 year.
Well, the big plan before the pandemic struck would be a series of public events that would involve different cultural groups.
We had to not do a lot of those events, which would have been face-to-face.
as the world shut down, the committee used virtual tools to meet and rethink plans for the bicentennial.
And we all began to get used to Zoom. And so I think that Zoom really helped us stay in touch and do our planning and our replanning because of the pandemic.
Making plans in 2020 for an event in 2021 was difficult. Nobody knew how long the lockdowns would last, how many cases there might be on the target date, or if a vaccine would be available.
So from the beginning, we started looking at how to bring programming to the public in a way that did not endanger them and that would be enjoyable for everyone that was participating in the project. So we began to focus on products that could be usable in a digital format and accessed by everyone.
One of those was the 1821 Sampler Project, an initiative of the West Florida Genealogical Society.
So our group was asked to participate in the project to try to get names of individuals who were here in 1821 when Spanish gave up control to the United States.
They figured it was probably one of our specialties to document individuals from the past. And so Virginia and I undertook that right at the beginning of the pandemic. So we ended up doing a lot of research online. And with the 1820 census that we had and all of the items that were digitally available, we were able to complete 2,300 names.
From little children who are almost never mentioned in the historic record, to women, to people of color, people who had what might be considered a mundane job at the time. Everyone had a voice.
With the database completed, people were invited to visit the website 1821sampler.com, search for an individual to represent, and submit a selfie photo. It could be someone they were related to. For example, I was lucky to represent my ancestor Margareta Bonifay de la Rua.
There were so many families who are still here from 1821 that are here in the present day. I have several of my personal family members who were here. And when you start looking at that history of your family, it makes history come alive.
But a family connection was optional, of course, and hundreds of people signed up to represent individuals from 1821, including many whose names were not preserved in the historic record.
We want to give names and faces to these individuals. We want to tell their story of these individuals.
My hope for this project is to take the celebration of history out of the realm of pure academia and bring it back to the streets of Pensacola, so that the people who live here now can connect with the people of 1821 as individuals, look at their lives and what they were doing and the roles they played in the community, and know a little bit about them. To know that they were living in Pensacola during a time of monumental change, the transition from being under the old world to becoming American, and to know that their lives were in upheaval, but they built the community that we live in today.
Another project developed during the pandemic connected those 1821 residents to the present by reminding us that in many cases, they're still here.
We felt like that we could draw people to the great outdoors, to visit historic St. Michael's Cemetery and actually get a sense of not only the cemetery itself, but of the people that were here in 1821.
So the best solution we came up with was coming up with a virtual walking tour, and we did that by means of ArcGIS story maps, which allows anyone to get on their mobile device or their computer in their living room, whatever works best for them, and take the tour from there. So the best thing you can do is be in the cemetery. I think that gives you the most immersive experience, but you just go to the website and pull it up on your phone, and it automatically sizes to fit whatever your device is, and you can just follow the dots along through the cemetery.
And then you can meander all over that cemetery and have a really nice leisurely stroll through the 8-acre green space.
You can walk through our cemetery and you see markers that are written in Greek, you'll see markers in Spanish, you'll see markers in French. You'll see everything from giant, elaborate monuments to small monuments that were made of concrete, and some that just say something as simple as mother. So we don't know who that person is anymore, but we still acknowledge their existence and we take care of them in the same way as the giant monuments to the industrial leaders of Pensacola's past.
Media outlets were also enlisted to help tell the bicentennial story.
The News Journal was approached and asked if they might consider running a series every week for the weeks running up to July 17th. And they very graciously said yes, they would. And so we had a series of scholars address different topics.
Forum, which is a publication from the Florida Humanities Council, is distributed statewide. And that publication consists of a number of articles that are scholarly intent that focus on the humanities. And so we were very fortunate that our scholars here had put together such wonderful articles with a wealth of information that we were able to submit that to Forum magazine. And we were very proud that they published as part of a precursor to the actual bicentennial kickoff.
And we also had programming on WSRE, a series of in-studio presentations for public television.
Those were formalized in that time period.
He mapped it out.
So Pensacola's always been cosmopolitan from the colonial period to the day.
We then had WUWF Radio do a series of programs based on the bicentennial, as well as our other radio stations in town. There were interviews with the television stations in town. And so it ended up being really quite well covered in terms of the media, which again was our big goal. Once we realized that we were not going to be having a series of indoor gatherings, it actually worked out in a very nice way, all things considered.
Even with all the socially distanced solutions and digital experiences, the Commission still hoped to pull off a big in-person event if it could be done safely.
Our plan A was to have something, an old-fashioned gathering, where we were together, we were without having to have masks on, we were outside.
That did not alter significantly. We kept aiming toward that, and we thought if we cannot do it on that day, then we will have plenty of film to be able to produce a product from.
But when it came time for the celebration, COVID was easing for the first time. This is in the summer of 2021. And there was a window between when the first vaccines worked and we could relax the restrictions.
We were really fortunate. It was one of the small windows when we saw the numbers really go down and we felt like we were moving out of pandemic mode and it would be safe to have an outdoor event, which is what we planned in terms of the actual day of the commemoration.
On the morning of the bicentennial, Chief Dan Skyhorse Helms of the Santa Rosa Creek Indian Tribe led a sunrise blessing in Museum Plaza, featuring a Muskogee Migosupka, or prayer.
We had advertised it ahead of time, told people they were welcome to come, but there could be no photography, no recording of any kind, but you could be part of the day and part of this event.
And it was traditional. We used the pipe and we smudged the area. We called people to this little ceremony with a conch shell, blowing a conch shell. And in the Native American animals, the crow carries messages from the Creator. So we had just begun doing our ceremony, and we had just begun doing our prayers, and 3 crows flew directly over us, and they crossed. They made a crossing pattern.
And so as the sun rose and the ceremony began, it was absolutely one of the most stunningly beautiful and moving experiences.
And so when those crows came across and they were cawing, it was like confirmation from the Creator that you're where you're supposed to be, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Later that morning, the UWF bands played as people began to arrive for the 10 a.m. formal ceremony. The Color Guard from the Navy Medicine Readiness and Training Command presented the colors, and Captain Tim Kinsella, commanding officer of NAS Pensacola, led the Pledge of Allegiance with his 2 sons.
United States of America.
Collier Merrill, chairman of the UWF Historic Trust, welcomed the guests and commented on the July heat.
And Wyndham should have probably said, you know, General, the townsfolk might appreciate maybe a cool day in the fall.
Commission Chairman Judy Benz and Reverend Freddie Tillis of Allen Chapel AME Church gave opening remarks, and Chief Skyhorse noted the historic nature of his presence on the stage.
You have just heard the Muskogee language, spoken openly and publicly here in Pensacola for the first time in 191 years.
UWF President Martha Saunders welcomed everyone. And additional presentations were made by a number of officials and dignitaries. U.S. Senator Rick Scott,
If you need anything in D.C., I'm doing my best to try to be helpful.
Captain Kinsella,
Very grateful for short sleeve white uniforms in the summertime.
Secretary of State Laurel Lee,
All of you, from Governor Ron DeSantis and Lieutenant Governor Jeanette Nunez.
Florida Senator Doug Broxson,
Whether it be Pensacola or St. Augustine.
Florida District 1 Representative Michelle Salzman,
I am grateful for my chief and all he does to keep Pensacola's Native American history relevant.
District 2 Representative Alex Andrade,
of the greatest state, of the greatest country the world has ever seen.
Escambia County Commissioner Robert Bender,
Derived from the Creek name Chambia, meaning clear water.
and Pensacola Mayor Grover Robinson.
We will continue to make history in Pensacola and Escambia County in being...
Dr. Bentz then discussed the time capsule that will be opened at the 225th anniversary in 2046.
So that in 2046, you all will be able to see what we left behind.
And fifth grader Caitlin Moore from Sacred Heart Cathedral School read her contest-winning essay, What It Means to Be an American.
Happy anniversary, Pensacola.
Dr. Leo Day, longtime music director of Olive Baptist Church, sang America the Beautiful in English and 4 other languages, including Spanish. He concluded with a rousing rendition of God Bless America.
My home, sweet home.
After the retirement of the colors, the exchange of flags ceremony was faithfully reenacted. As officials gathered around the flagpole, soldiers lowered the Spanish flag and hoisted an American flag with 23 stars, the number of states in 1821. The band played the Star-Spangled Banner as they did at the original ceremony. The crowd was treated to a flyover by Navy Training Air Wing 6, which admittedly did not occur in 1821, and that was followed by a 12-gun salute. Finally, Mayor Robinson and Commissioner Bender unveiled a state historical marker commemorating both the transfer and the bicentennial itself.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Escambia County. Happy birthday to you.
It was a great day for us. I was very pleased with this, and just this is beyond my wildest imagination when we started this process.
And we had a great turnout today like we hoped for, and a lot of folks that have been really important to our community, leading our community, like mayors and commissioners, and we're just really glad to see everybody that came out to celebrate.
But the ceremony was just a small part of the weekend's festivities. One of the goals of the bicentennial was to give visitors a sense of what life was like in 1821. This kind of immersive experience is known as living history, and it's an area where Pensacola really shines. Starting with the 1959 Quadricentennial, which recreated an old Spanish village on Pensacola Beach, and the 1966 Evening in Old Seville Square, which transported participants back to the gay 90s, Pensacola has used heritage sites and costumed reenactors to make history engaging and fun.
Now they do it at, Jamestown, they do it at Monticello, they do it at lots of other places, but we've been right there with them the whole time.
The historic Pensacola Village opened in 1987, and today it is operated year-round by the UWF Historic Trust. It's an 8.5-acre complex with more than a dozen buildings available to the public, including museums, historic homes, and outdoor interpretive sites. And as it turns out, having this infrastructure already in place was ideal for an event like this.
On a hot July day, to have this many people out enjoying, Pensacola, I look down the street here and see people going into the museums and the history and the culture that's here and taking it all in.
All the museums are open today. It's a lot of learning, a lot of activity. We have a scavenger hunt, and I'm just really, my heart is full to see so much love shown to us today.
On Friday and Saturday, living history reenactors gave demonstrations and talked with the guests.
Living history or reenacting, I enjoy the education aspect of it, talking to the visitors, educating the public, putting on a public program like this to bring awareness to significant parts of Pensacola's history. We've had a lot of reenactors coming here from all across the Southeast. We've got folks here from Arkansas, from Alabama, from Louisiana. So I just want to thank all of these people that have put in their time and effort to come here, to travel to Pensacola, and to help make this event a success.
When we were looking around for a way to communicate and have people experience local transport of goods on the water, we came across a keelboat named the Ozark from Arkansas. And we thought, well, they wouldn't come all the way. Well, they did.
The reenacting group that we belong to in Arkansas, that's our primary function, is educating people about their early history, not only of Arkansas, but wherever we go out of state, we try to educate people about the history of that area. If you look at particularly West Florida, the keelboat was used a lot going up and down the various rivers.
Having a boat like that, something that it's kind of like having a truck today, an 18-wheeler. The keelboats were how people moved their goods around. And that kind of experience and living history demonstration we thought would be very educational. It was real popular.
And a family came down there and they got on, they played with the oars and everything. And one of the young men, he was like 8 years old, they were leaving and he turned around and he said, "You know, you make history fun." And that kind of sums up, that's what we're after.
And what's a cultural festival without food?
You are what you eat, and your food reflects your background and your particular personal niche.
And so much of what we did focused on what people were eating, what they were growing. We have a wonderful archaeological record and a wonderful historic record here. So we're able to blend the two of those to get a really comprehensive view of what people were doing in their normal lives.
This is our kitchen house, and so I just pulled the beef stew off of our hot coals. I browned the meat first, and then I actually added our vegetables. So we had carrots and potatoes and onions that we added in there. I seasoned it with rosemary, and it is gorgeous, and I'm really proud of myself.
Chef Irv Miller of Jackson Steakhouse, our restaurant, he really got interested in this whole cultural, historical foodways. And so each year we have done what we call a Jacksonian dinner. And at that dinner, Chef Irv, he always looks to historic things were here in the past, such as red snapper. We were known as the red snapper capital of the world, oysters, pecans, Seville oranges, all those kinds of things that were here then and now. And we have found that people are really interested in learning about culinary cultural heritage.
For a libation, Pensacola had already created a signature drink that tied into the territorial period, the 23-star salute.
A group of community folks got together and they were really wanting to put together something signature for Pensacola and history, and they came up with this cocktail called the 23-star salute. And the main ingredient in that drink is rye whiskey, again, something that's been around for a very long time. So we reached out to all the bars and restaurants downtown and said, hey, during this bicentennial time, it'd be wonderful if you put it on the menu. And a number did.
Rye whiskey makes the band sound better, makes your baby cuter, makes yourself taste sweeter. Oh boy!
So you always start with a fresh orange in the glass. You're going to take your orange bitters, do a couple dashes, about 2 or 3. Give that a nice little muddle just to get some of that orange out and make sure that you're expressing a little bit more of that orange flavor in there. soft muddle there. And this is where we're going to start building the cocktail. So now you get a shaker tin full of ice. You're going to start with a nice rye whiskey. Do 1.5 ounces of rye whiskey. Add a little bit of honey, East Hill honey, of course. It's 1/2 ounce of East Hill honey, and 1/2 ounce of fresh lime juice, a 1/2 ounce of fresh simple syrup, half ounce of triple sec, an ounce of Calvados brandy, a scoop of ice. Perfect. Top this with ice. Of course, now that we've got that all shaken together, you're going to strain that. Simple strain. Beautifully refreshing cocktail for the summer. One of our staples at Jackson's.
Diversity, people's ethnicity, is expressed many different ways. One is food, one is dress, one is transportation, and one is music and dance. We've never seen a culture that didn't have music and that didn't have a dance and tell a story and communicate that way. That is really exclusively human.
2 groups were invited to perform traditional dances, the Ayoka African Drum and Dance Group from Tallahassee and the group Folklorico of St. Patrick's Church in Robertsdale.
These clothes come from Veracruz. It's in the Gulf to Mexico. It's a representation to the people coming to Pensacola to work.
We particularly brought folks from Mexico who are very much a part of the history of Pensacola and the founding of what we know as the United States now.
And I have the presentation 2 songs. I dance El Fandango Jarocho and La Guacamaya. That's a bird. The second one, another is another song only for Veracruz, the old music from Veracruz.
We know that there were 1,500 people that came to make the original settlement, and they came from the Yucatan Peninsula, many of which were Aztec people of what we know as Mexico now.
I like to dance and I like to enjoy and I like to present for the people, and I like the more better to my group, the girls, show the young people can enjoy the Mexican culture and see it's not something you can make a rush, it's something pretty and make it fun.
Traditionally, any dance that we do from a traditional perspective has purpose. So there are dances that are done during harvest time. There are dances that are done to celebrate. There are dances that are done when people get married, when they have babies, because African dance is a way of life. It isn't separate. So all of these milestones that we experience in our lives, West African dance and drum will be a part of that, and song for that matter.
We definitely know African dance happened in colonial Pensacola. In fact, I found an article from some years later that talked about how Black people in the city would gather on Sundays, which was their day off, and participate in what the reporter considered Congo dance. Now we know it might have just been African dance from all parts of Africa or even the diaspora, but people don't really realize that Pensacola had its own version of Congo Square.
To get together in any capacity and dance and sing and communicate and feel the power of collectiveness and family, that's who we are as Africans who were brought over and ended up here in America. So this is very appropriate. This is exactly what it would have looked like 200 years ago. Yes, sir.
Today I am so proud of my city to be able to stand, to look around and listen to the chatter of people who celebrate all the citizens and all the diverse cultures that are here in Pensacola and who were here. So we're dug in deep. Our heels are in the soil, our blood's in the sand, we are here. And I'm grateful today to see all of the recognition that was paid to all of the residents of our county.
The Territorial Bicentennial is another example of Pensacola and Escambia County's commitment to cultural heritage tourism.
Heritage tourism is a really big product for our community. It's one of our economic drivers. And so any way that we can actually connect people with the history and the heritage of our community is a win-win.
There has been a great movement here in Pensacola, certainly over the past 10 years, of really looking to our history and shouting it and saying, hey, this happened here. And it is a wonderful thing for us to be able to shout out.
If you're in Pensacola and it's raining, you are not going to be sitting on the beach.
And so I think it's for people that don't want to just come to the beach or want to come to the beach and do more. We have a great offering for them that's very unique to us. It's our story, and we're just really excited that we can share it and tell people more about why this is such a great place.
And this is just another thing in our tool belt to be able to share our story of Pensacola.
The project did not stop on July 17th of 2021. The UWF Historic Trust edited and republished all of the articles that had been in the Pensacola News Journal into 2 volumes of Pensacola History Illustrated. So that moved forward on that front.
The Bicentennial was represented later in the year at one of the city's biggest fall events, Foo Fest.
Foo Fest is a cultural celebration that happens every year. And this past year we had a great digital art display. And it was projected on our Tell Gallery. And that display was our history, our story. How did Pensacola come to be? And it was digitally projected and it came to life and it went through everything from the fires and the hurricanes and the storms and all that kind of stuff.
And this incorporated parts of the commemoration, in particular the images from the 1821 Sampler Project.
And it was just wonderful for present people to give a voice to those voices of the past.
1821.
I represent David Williams.
Alexandra Bienvenue Kumarin.
Maria Garcia Salsa.
Salvador Ruby.
Doña Victoria Gagné.
I represent George Brooke Tunstall.
Josefa Vidal Bruin.
James C. Craig.
I represent Ebenezer Harrington.
Luisa Benita Gallar.
Desiderio Kina.
Colonel James G. Forbes.
I proudly represent Betty, also called Bet.
Besides the memories of the Bicentennial, many of these products will stick around for the foreseeable future. And it's a future that will increasingly focus on inclusion.
We realized that today we are a welcoming community for everyone. In 1821, not so much so. We had people who were enslaved here, and we had Native people, indigenous people who were not part of the mix. And one thing that the event did was to point out, number one, how far we've come.
Because it's so important to acknowledge every piece of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we all have a genuine understanding of what our true history is like.
So who gets to tell the story? All of us do. It's not just a privilege, it's an obligation to future generations.
The children need to understand their history. My father had a saying. He said it's no longer a mystery once you understand the history.
And we had many children that actually participated in the overall event. I was watching them and I was thinking, these are the stewards of the future. It's not just of our history and heritage, but of everything that surrounds us as a culture. These are the stewards.
Here in Pensacola, in Escambia County, a group of people came together at a time of incredible hardship to plan and execute an ambitious commemoration. To tell the story of when Floridians became Americans, and to celebrate the diversity of a community that, depending on who you ask, may be America's first, but that everyone can call home.
The rivalry between St. Augustine and Pensacola continues. St. Augustine says that there was, in 1821, on July the 10th, a modest celebration or event in St. Augustine. And then the dignitaries came over to Pensacola a week later and had a much bigger and better celebration here. So in 2021, they did the same thing. They had to be first, even though we just scoffed at them, but they also, in 2021, didn't do much. We, on the other hand, in 1821, had the big deal with the governors and the generals and all of the dignitaries, and we had it again in 2021. So it's quite a rivalry, and they won't let it go, and neither will we.